Okay, welcome to a lesson on parallel structure. This is actually my favourite topic. Lots of times people ask me, how can I get my English from advanced to even better? And natives ask me this question sometimes as well, and I always answer with the same two words, parallel structure. Very few people in Britain get taught parallel structure. I certainly wasn't taught anything about it at school or at university, but it's without doubt the most important, the most useful rhetorical device you will ever learn about, because it actually it includes a lot of different sentences. We're going to look at four different occasions when you need to use parallel structure. We won't look at the last one. There is a fifth one, which is copular verbs, and I don't have space on the board to do copular verbs, so perhaps we'll do that in another class. But it is these four that are the most important. These are the four situations when you really do need to use parallel structure. And the reason why you need to use parallel structure all the time is because you are using coordinating conjunctions all the time. You're using lists all the time. You're using comparisons all the time, and you're even using correlative conjunctions quite often. And so you need to be using this a lot. And the more that you use it, the better your sentences become, the clearer they become, the less confusing they become. Okay, and so this is why parallel structure is important, but very few people have ever heard about it, or they don't really know anything about it. And so let's start right from the beginning. And the general idea is that we must compare like with like. You can't compare apples and oranges, we sometimes say. And according to the same logic, you can't compare a noun, table, with an adjective, blue. Yeah, you can't do that. You've got to compare a noun with a noun, or an adjective with an adjective, or an adverbial phrase with an adverbial phrase, or a relative clause with a relative clause. And this is precisely why we started with parts of speech. I wanted you to already be aware of what all of those words mean before we do topics like parallel structure, because you need to understand the parts of speech to be able to put your sentences in parallel, or your clauses in parallel, or your lists and your comparisons in parallel. Okay, and a lot of these questions actually come from an American exam called the GMAT exam. It's the exam which they take in order to enter the Ivy League universities. And they have a sentence correction part in the exam where you have option A, B, C, D, and E. A is always identical to the original sentence, and then B is a slightly different version, C is another different version, D another different version. And I was introduced to this exam quite a long time ago now, about 5 or 10 years ago. It must be 10 years ago now. And I was astonished how much I learned just doing the questions for this exam. It was great. I already knew a lot about TEFL grammar, Raymond Murphy, that kind of thing, but I had never heard of parallel structure. And it really is important. It's really good for making your sentences as clear as possible, yeah, so that the reader or the listener immediately understands what you're talking about. Okay, and so you can find loads of these questions online. You don't have to buy a big book like this. I actually regret buying a big book like this. You can find loads of them online. I mean, the questions in there are good as well, but they're not only sentence correction. There are lots of other questions that aren't anything connected to grammar. There's a big maths part in there, for example, which I don't think is very hard, but the English part is very hard. Sorry, that's my printer. The English part is very hard, especially this parallel structure part, and you learn a lot when you're doing it. You learn a lot about parts of speech and parallel structure. So let's actually go through one of the questions from the GMAT exam. And I want you to be aware that firstly, with coordinating conjunctions, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so, they always join equal parts. Equal parts, they are like and like. They join like things together. And so you must make sure, anytime you use a coordinating conjunction, that your list, because when you're using an and, you're dealing with a list. Same with a but, and same with all of these words that join equal parts. So when you're doing lists, when you're using coordinating conjunctions in a list, because usually you do see a coordinating conjunction at the end of a list, well, then you need to think about parallel structure. So have a look at this first sentence, because it really becomes important in complicated sentences, the kind of sentences you use in an academic essay. And so when you're doing your writing, you really want to be aware of parallel structure, but I think you want to be aware of parallel structure in your speaking as well, because if you use it in your speaking, it does get noticed. Or certainly I will notice anyway, with lists that are carefully arranged. So look at this sentence. By providing such services as mortgages, home improvement loans, automobile loans, financial advice, and staying within the metropolitan areas, Acme Bank has become one of the most profitable saving banks in the nation. Now, I've slightly simplified this sentence. They usually give you in that exam a much longer, more complicated sentence. But I've simplified it a little bit just so I can get it on the board. And you can see that option A is exactly the same as this. Financial advice and staying, financial advice and staying. But B slightly changes it to financial advice, comma, and by staying. So it has that preposition in here as well, okay? And so you can see that B is slightly different, and it wants you to choose the best one. And it really is, you need to choose the one where the lists have the items in parallel. And you notice I say lists. I hope that you have already seen that this sentence contains not one list, but two lists. Okay, it actually contains two lists, and so you really need to know, and this is what you need to do with this A, B, C, D and E. You need to choose the answer which really makes the two lists very clear. Yeah, and so let's find the lists. Yeah, there's the first item in the list. Yeah, we've got such as mortgages, home improvement loans, automobile loans, and financial advice. Yeah, the staying is not part of that first list. And so we have to be careful. We have to make sure the listener understands that. Yeah, we have to be very careful, make sure the listener understands that. And so generally speaking, in a list, you normally say, this is called syndetic coordination if you're interested, and it's not absolutely necessary, but when you've got two lists so close, it does become very helpful. Yeah, to say mortgages, home improvement loans, automobile loans, and then we need our coordinating conjunction, and financial advice. Yeah, and so A and B are both wrong because they both kind of sound like this financial advice and by staying. It sounds like this is the last part of that very first list, but it's not. The staying, which is a gerund, yeah, here, it's not the last item of that list, and it can't be, because this is an ordinary noun, 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 and then to have a gerund does not sound parallel. They're not all the same types of words. And so let's make this clear. Let's say we need to choose one of these with and financial advice, yeah, and so A is wrong, B is wrong. Let's look at the other options. We've got and financial advice, comma, staying. And we've got and financial advice, comma, and staying. And we've got and financial advice, comma, and by staying. Now, we've got two ands, and for two lists, that really is what we want when they're both together like this. You know, you've really got a list inside the other list. We want to say by providing X, Y, Z, and W, and by staying within the metropolitan area, and then that's nice and clear. Yeah, if we've got an and here and by staying, then it's very clear that the first list is 1, 2, 3 and 4, and the second part of the other list by providing and by staying, yeah, is here 1, 2. So E is correct, and we don't want C, we don't want D. Okay, and so this is what we mean by parallel structure. It's making your lists and using your coordinating conjunctions carefully to make sure that your lists are really clear. It's much clearer now to the person who's listening that you mean by providing mortgages, home improvement loans, automobile loans, and financial advice, and by staying within the metropolitan areas, Acme Bank has become one of the most profitable saving banks in the nation.